Albert Camus begins not as a philosopher, but as a surgeon, cutting through everything that pretends to make life meaningful. If life is meaningless, why keep living? It's the only question that matters, because every other question about morality, politics, love, or God collapses if existence itself isn't worth continuing. Camus calls it the absurd, not chaos, not despair, but the collision between the human need for meaning and the universe's total silence. We are wired for answers. The mind wants patterns. Yet reality answers like a blank wall. The absurd is born of this confrontation between the human need and the unreasonable silence of the world. You look for justice, and you find randomness. You love, and the person leaves. You work for success, and someone luckier takes it. You pray, and the sky stays quiet. That tension between the hunger for reason and the indifference of the void is what Camus calls the feeling of the absurd. Most people can't stand that tension. They escape through philosophical suicide, a brilliant term Camus invents for the mental gymnastics people use to avoid the absurd. Religious suicide, there must be a reason. Ideological suicide, history has a plan. Romantic suicide, love gives life meaning. Material suicide, money will fix the void. They all do the same thing. They surrender lucidity for comfort. Camus sees this everywhere, not just in religion, but in modern consumerism, politics, social media. People are terrified of silence, so they fill it with noise, likes, causes, hustle, distractions, anything to not face the question that eats them alive. What if none of this means anything? He says the only honest act is to look at life without filters. No divine plan, no destiny, no cosmic fairness. That sounds cold, but it's liberating. You see the rules for what they are, invented. Morality, success, fame, all man-made constructs. The absurd person isn't lost, they're free. Free from illusion. Free from guilt. Camus wrote this in 1942, surrounded by war and propaganda. People were killing each other for ideologies, nations, gods, stories. He saw that behind every flag, every belief system, there was the same fear, the fear of meaninglessness. Fast forward to 2025, it's the same, just digital. We worship algorithms instead of gods. We sacrifice peace for validation. Every notification is a small prayer. Please tell me I exist. Camus would say, you do exist, but existence doesn't mean anything until you decide it does. So what do you do once you accept the absurd? You don't kill yourself. You live anyway, fully, consciously, rebelliously. Camus calls this revolt. The revolt gives life its value. It means to live without justification, to embrace life not because it has meaning, but because you are strong enough to face it without one. It's like looking into the void and saying, you don't get to win, I do. Here's what most people miss. Camus isn't a pessimist. He's the ultimate realist. He's telling you that once you stop searching for a reason to live, you finally start living. When you realize there's no grand reward, every moment becomes the reward. When you realize no one is coming to save you, you become dangerous, because you are finally awake. The absurd man doesn't kneel, he creates. He doesn't worship, he builds. He doesn't hope, he acts. That's the paradox. When you accept that life is meaningless, you gain the power to give it meaning. If you can face a meaningless universe and still laugh, love, create, and fight, then you've already won. He's done explaining why life is absurd. Now he asks, how do you live once you know? You stop waiting for meaning. You start creating it, moment by moment, action by action. Camus calls this person the absurd man. He's the one who looks at the void and still chooses to play. The absurd man has killed the need for justification. He no longer needs approval, not from God, not from society, not even from his own guilt. He understands the game has no prize, so he stops begging for rules. He who has understood that the world has no meaning and that it is impossible to find a reason for being is free. Freedom begins when you stop trying to be innocent. You can waste your life trying to be good by someone else's definition, or you can build your own code. That's what the absurd man does. He lives without appeal, meaning he answers to no higher court, not religion, not fate, not morality. He's his own judge, his own author, his own punishment. Camus gives us 4 faces of the absurd man. The first is Don Juan, the eternal lover. Not because he's romantic, but because he refuses permanence. He doesn't seek the one, he seeks the experience itself. Each love affair is a moment fully lived, beautiful, fleeting, unapologetic. He doesn't lie to his lovers or to himself. He knows it will end, and he still dives in. To love and to possess are contradictory terms. In our age, Don Juan isn't just a seducer. He's the person who refuses emotional illusion. He doesn't chase forever, he collects intensity. He's the opposite of the person who builds their identity around attachment. Modern version? The entrepreneur who burns out companies just to feel alive. The artist who falls in love with the chaos of creation, not the result. The person who would rather feel everything for a second than feel nothing forever. Next, Camus gives us the actor, the one who understands that life is a stage, and everything we do is a form of performance. Most people live for eternity. They want legacy, history, immortality. The actor lives for intensity. Every performance is temporary. When the curtain falls, it's over. That's exactly why he gives it everything. The actor teaches us that fame is worthless, but the moment of creation is everything. Camus is describing a psychological truth. When you stop chasing permanence, you start mastering presence. The absurd man doesn't perform for applause, he performs for aliveness. The third face is the conqueror, not a soldier of ideology, but a warrior of intensity. He fights because fighting is living. He doesn't care about heaven, hell, or history. He wants the electricity of action. The conqueror doesn't die for an illusion. He risks everything for the act itself. To live is to act is to affirm. This is the mind of those who build empires knowing they'll crumble. The rebel isn't against the world, he's against its false gods. He refuses the systems that tell him who to be or what to believe. His rebellion isn't chaos, it's clarity. To rebel is to say, I see your illusion, and I choose myself instead. The absurd rebel doesn't need revolution to feel powerful. His rebellion is waking up in a sleeping world and staying awake. Once you accept that there's no external meaning, life becomes a mirror. You see yourself as you are. The weak collapse under that reflection. The strong build themselves from it. The absurd man plays with life the way a chess master plays a losing game, not because he expects to win, but because every move still matters. He knows death is coming, but that's irrelevant. What matters is how you play while you're alive. Today, the absurd man lives everywhere, though we don't always recognize him. He's the scientist who works on a project knowing it may never pay off. He's the lover who gives everything without needing forever. He's the man or woman who, instead of asking, "What's the point?" says, "Watch me." That's the essence of Camus' message. You don't live for meaning. You live for intensity, clarity, and defiance. He takes the lead of meaninglessness and turns it into gold through consciousness. He doesn't look for purpose, he becomes it. He doesn't believe in hope, he creates momentum. And maybe that's the real definition of strength. To walk through a meaningless world with your head high and make every step an act of rebellion. Camus begins with a paradox. If life has no meaning, then creation itself should be pointless. That, says Camus, is the purest form of defiance, to keep creating beauty inside a world that promises you nothing. When you create, you don't explain life, you face it. You don't seek meaning, you expose its absence. He creates because it's the only honest way to exist consciously in an absurd world. The absurd creator knows his work means nothing in the end, and that's exactly why he's free. He's liberated from judgment, legacy, and immortality. He creates not for eternity, but for intensity. If the world were clear, art would not exist. When reality makes no sense, creation becomes the only language that can speak truth. The absurd artist is not trying to fix the world, he's trying to mirror it with courage, to show how beautiful, terrifying, and temporary it really is. Their art doesn't save, it resists. Camus despises art that tries to serve a moral or political purpose. That kind of art, he says, is just another religion, a disguise for people still craving meaning. True art is useless, but holy in its uselessness. The absurd work does not explain, it merely describes. A painting, a poem, a song, they are acts of rebellion precisely because they don't justify themselves. They exist for their own intensity, not for approval. That's why propaganda art, ideological art, or healing art are false forms of creation. They exist to comfort, not to confront. The absurd creator, by contrast, doesn't ask to be understood. He asks to be felt. Camus wrote this in the 1940s, but if he lived today, he would say the same thing about content creation and social media art. We've turned creation into performance. Everyone's an artist, but almost no one is creating from rebellion, only from validation addiction. The influencer who sells vulnerability as a product. The writer who edits truth to please algorithms. The musician who follows trends instead of instincts. Camus would call that philosophical surrender in aesthetic form. The absurd creator doesn't chase applause. He chases lucidity, the sharp, unfiltered awareness that what he's doing will be forgotten, and that he's doing it anyway. When Camus says, to create is to live twice, he means this. Each time you create, you extract life from death. The world forgets you, time erases you, but the act itself, the doing, is a small victory against oblivion. That's why he admired Kirillov, the character from Dostoevsky's The Possessed, who kills himself not out of despair but as an experiment, to prove that man can become God by choosing death freely. Camus rejects Kirillov's conclusion but admires his audacity. To stare at nothingness and act anyway, that's creation. Art becomes rebellion the moment it says, I know this means nothing, and I'm going to do it perfectly anyway. He knows the wind will erase his work, but while he builds, he feels alive. This is what Camus calls the ethics of creation without hope. It's the morality of those who don't need an afterlife or applause, only the fire of doing. There's a reason this philosophy feels modern. It's how every self-aware creator, entrepreneur, or visionary truly lives. They know the game is rigged, success is temporary, and fame is the fastest way to spiritual emptiness. When you build without needing meaning, you tap into something divine, the power of presence. The absurd creator doesn't say, I hope this matters. He says, I know it doesn't, and that's why I'm free to do it right. In the end, Camus says, the only justification for creation is to create lucidly. The absurd creator's art isn't a message, it's a mirror. It reflects what most people can't stand to see, that beauty and meaning are temporary, but rebellion can be eternal. Because to build in the face of meaninglessness is to prove that the human spirit is greater than its fate. The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. Sisyphus, condemned by the gods to roll a boulder up a hill for eternity, only to watch it roll back down again. Every day, forever. It's the perfect metaphor for human life. We work, we love, we build, we climb, and everything collapses. We start over, and over, and over. Most people see that as tragedy. Camus saw it as victory. In Greek myth, Sisyphus is punished for his cleverness, for defying the gods, for trying to outsmart death. He refuses to bow to divine authority, so his punishment is to perform a task with no meaning, no end, and no reward. Sound familiar? It's modern existence. Working jobs that feed systems we don't believe in. Loving people we know we'll lose. Building careers that will vanish in time. Seeking purpose in a universe that never answers back. Sisyphus isn't ancient mythology. He's every one of us who wakes up and does it again anyway. The most important part of Camus' image is not when Sisyphus pushes the rock. It's when he walks back down the hill. That's when he's conscious. He knows the rock will fall again. He knows there's no salvation, and yet he doesn't surrender. That small moment, the descent, is the moment of freedom. In that instant, Sisyphus is greater than his fate. He sees it, owns it, and refuses to despair. The rock is the weight we all carry: responsibility, routine, repetition, mortality. You can hate it, you can escape it, or you can transform it. Camus says, when you stop expecting life to be different, the rock loses its cruelty. It becomes your rock, your task, your proof of existence. This is the psychological core of Camus' message. The pain doesn't disappear, but your relationship to it changes. The absurd man turns burden into purpose, repetition into mastery, futility into freedom. It's what modern psychology calls radical acceptance, the power of owning your struggle so completely that it can no longer own you. We live in an age built entirely on repetition. Emails, deadlines, notifications, an endless loop of almost there. But there's a strange power hidden in that monotony. The modern Sisyphus isn't a victim. He's a conscious player in a meaningless system. He uses awareness as his rebellion. He knows there's no final victory, yet he finds beauty in every climb, the breath, the sweat, the movement itself. The system wants you to chase rewards. The absurd man finds meaning in the act itself. He redefines punishment as power. The gods wanted to humiliate him. Instead, he humiliates them by refusing to suffer. This is the ultimate form of spiritual rebellion, when no external force can dictate your inner state. When you can look at endless repetition, at pain, futility, loss, and say, yes, and I still choose to push. That's transcendence. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. Not because his life is good, it's terrible. But because he's awake. Happiness for Camus is not comfort. It's lucidity, the clear, defiant joy of someone who has looked at the truth and still said yes. When you abandon the illusion of meaning, you discover the intensity of existence. Every moment becomes pure, raw, alive, because you no longer expect it to save you. Camus wasn't glorifying suffering, he was redefining power. You can't choose your fate, you can't control the world, but you can control how you walk down the hill. The moment you stop needing hope, you become untouchable. That's why Sisyphus is the patron saint of consciousness. because he proves that even in a universe without meaning, dignity, strength, and rebellion are still possible. It's a manual for living in a meaningless world without surrendering to nihilism, delusion, or faith. He teaches that meaninglessness is not emptiness, it's a blank canvas. You can cry over it or you can paint on it. When you stop asking, "Why me?" and start saying, "Watch me," that's when you become dangerous. Because nothing can control a human being who has learned to push the rock and smile. Camus didn't write The Myth of Sisyphus to sound clever, he wrote it to survive. He was living in Nazi-occupied France, watching an entire civilization crumble. The world was absurd not as an idea but as a fact. That's when Camus said the most revolutionary thing any philosopher had ever said: "I will not look for meaning, I will create it." We crave order, justice, purpose, and the universe answers with silence. Once you accept that there's no grand narrative, you stop being manipulated by those who sell you one: religions, ideologies, corporations, influencers. They all promise meaning if you obey. Camus' answer: don't. Freedom begins the second you stop demanding that life makes sense. After recognition comes rebellion. How do you live once you know the truth? You live without appeal. No God, no fate, no final score. The absurd man doesn't chase happiness, he practices lucidity. He knows that meaning is a product, not a discovery. He lives like Don Juan, not addicted to forever, but devoted to the intensity of now. He performs like the actor, knowing the curtain will fall, yet giving everything to the scene. He conquers like the warrior, aware that victory is temporary, but motion is life. He rebels, not to change the world, but to stay awake inside it. Once you've killed the illusion, what's left to build? Creation is rebellion in its purest form. You know your work will be forgotten, and yet you create as if it won't. That's not delusion, that's strength. To create for nothing is to declare that being alive, even briefly, is enough reason to express beauty. You don't need eternity, you need intensity. And so we arrive at Sisyphus, the absurd hero. He knows the gods are laughing, the mountain is endless, and the rock will fall again. But he pushes it anyway. That act, the conscious repetition of the meaningless, becomes freedom itself. Camus' final line, "One must imagine Sisyphus happy," is not about smiling through pain. It's about the power of ownership. The moment you claim your struggle as yours, it stops being punishment. It becomes purpose. Camus was never a nihilist. He didn't say nothing matters. He said nothing has inherent meaning. Therefore everything you do matters infinitely. When there's no pre-written script, every choice is absolute. That's terrifying, but also divine. To live absurdly is to live like a god without heaven, aware of death, unafraid of it, alive not because life is meaningful, but because you choose to make it beautiful anyway. Camus wrote this for 1942, but he described 2025 perfectly: a world addicted to distraction. People worshipping productivity to avoid silence. Meaning outsourced to algorithms, influencers, and cults of positivity. Camus would tell you, turn off the noise. Create something useless but honest. Say something true even if no one likes it. Work, love, build, push with open eyes. Because the moment you stop needing a reason, you become dangerous to every system built on control. Camus' philosophy can be reduced to one sentence: live without why. Live not for reward, not for eternity, not to prove anything, but because living lucidly is the highest form of rebellion. The absurd man wakes up every day and pushes the rock again, not hoping it will stay at the top, but because the act of pushing is life itself. Not despair, not meaning, freedom.